everybody, it's Mr. Shoes here. Today I've been asked to teach you how to make an alcohol stove out of some soda cans for ultralight backpacking on the trek. The reasons you might want to carry an alcohol stove with you are price and weight. The upfront cost of creating one of these is minimal and it's feather light. Things you want to consider if you're going this way is the availability of that fuel along the way. In our experience, people who carried alcohol stoves on the trail had to go to auto body shops to try and find the denatured alcohol to fill it, and they had to buy very large containers, which meant that they were spending more money than they needed to, and they were leaving quite a lot of fuel behind. It's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about cost savings as carrying one of these stoves. Now, what do you need to make one of these stoves? Well, the key is a can of soda. I say a can of soda, but you're actually going to need 2 cans of soda. And they're going to need to be empty. So choose a can of soda that you actually like drinking. Thoroughly rinse and dry your can to avoid sticky fingers while building your stove. Other items you need to build your stove other than 2 soda cans is a ruler or tape measure, a pair of scissors you don't mind getting dull by cutting aluminum cans, 2 Stanley knives or X-Acto knives or box cutters, a pair of pliers, a Sharpie, a piece of printer paper, a drill, a piece of scrap wood, and a surface to work on. We need the bottom of 2 cans of soda. In order to get them, we need 1.5 inches from the bottom. You can take your ruler or a tape measure and you can measure up 1.5 inches, which is about there. Mark it with your Sharpie. If you are working with the metric system, it's 37 millimeters. Mark it a couple of places around the can so that you can connect the dots and make sure that it's an even cut all the way around. As best you can, connect the dots all the way around your can. There are a number of ways to cut an aluminum can for an alcohol stove. My son and I use the scoring method, where we slide the can along a fixed blade a number of times around. This will limit any risk of you actually denting the can or warping the can if you're using a pair of scissors. All you need to do is make sure that your blade is fixed as you go around so it doesn't cut the can in a spiral. If you're unsure of holding your blade in the same place as you go around every turn, you can screw your blade down to your scrap piece of wood. When it gets close to cutting all the way through, avoid the temptation of sawing at the aluminum. Keep scoring it until you're able to break the can apart. On your second can, take your X-Acto or Stanley knife and score the inside rim of the base of the can. Be patient and go slowly, being mindful not to cut your hand, as the metal is thicker here and will require a considerable amount of scoring before you cut all the way through. Once you have a hole in the bottom, mark and score and cut the can the same way you scored the first one. At this point we have our 2 pieces of the stove, which can't necessarily go together because of the same diameter. Now we're going to spread the bottom part that doesn't have a hole in it, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But the first thing we need to consider is why we don't just have one side of the can that we fill with fuel and burn off. It's inefficient. The inefficiency of an open bath fuel can is the whole reason why we're making this stove. Our finished stove here actually has a wall inside that creates a gap between the outside of the fuel can and where we add the fuel. And that is going to create a convection and an efficiency to the stove that just having an open bath can does not have. So now at this point we're going to make the inner wall to our new stove. Here's the template for our inside wall of our stove. Use your ruler to mark out a 7 1/4 by 2 1/4 inch rectangle. That's 5.5 centimeters by 18.5 centimeters. While you have your ruler here, make a 3/4 inch mark halfway up the rectangle on opposing sides and go ahead and cut out your template. You'll notice along the bottom I've made these notches. Cut those out as well. They do not need to be pretty. Take one of your leftover halves of your cans and put your template around your can. You'll notice that it does not go all the way around, so please use the template that's provided. Use your Sharpie, trace it all the way around. Since you're not using the entire circumference of the can, we can use a pair of scissors to cut out this space and make it easier. We don't have to use the scoring method. Use a pair of robust scissors. This is a pair of cardboard scissors or a pair of tin snips, and cut along your lines. You can actually cut somewhere else if you want to be messy, and then we'll do some fine cutting it afterwards. Be mindful not to cut yourself, but the sharp edges of the can are the very robust scissors that you're using. Now the little notches you cut are going to allow fuel to burn between the inner and outer wall of our stove, creating that thermal layer and convection that I described earlier. Line it up again. Be sure to cut these notch lines halfway the length of that 2 1/4 inch side, or they will not notch together properly. As I mentioned earlier, we need to put both bottoms of the soda cans together. That's impossible as both soda cans are the same diameter. We need to expand one end so that we can end up making our stove. In order to do that, I put a can of soda in the freezer so that the soda would start to expand just shy of exploding, and then use that to press it into the bottom of one of the cans, the one that does not have a hole in it. Carefully using your pliers, heat up the bottom of the can that you intend on expanding. Use your near-frozen soda to press into the warmed side. As you press your can down into the warmed end, you have to realize that you're creating a bubble of air which cannot escape. Rock the soda can back and forth and ease it out to allow that air to escape and avoid a rupture. Apply steady, even pressure to avoid cutting or breaking the aluminum. This will require you to start over. The constant pressure will eventually allow the frozen can to stretch all the way to the bottom of your new stove. Now that I've successfully pressed the super cold soda into the bottom of my potential stove, I have the issue of then getting it off. I can let the soda come to room temperature, and as it contracts, slide it off the bottom. The other thing we can do is to open the soda, release some of the pressure that's inside, and see if we can take the can off if you're impatient. Next, we will use our Sharpie to mark guides for us to drill our jet holes. Each dot should be about the size of the tip of your Sharpie. They should be uniformly spaced and be a bit down from the edge of the can. Make sure you make these marks on the can that you have cut the open top on so that we don't have holes in the bottom of our stove. The last thing you need to do before assembly is to use your drill to make each one of these dots that you've drawn a hole for your burner. Have a piece of wood that you don't mind getting holes in, a bit scrap piece of wood. Place your soda can over the top, being mindful not to drill your fingers. Place your drill bit and drill through. Now you can see the aluminum doesn't take a lot to get a hole into it. So be very careful, use very little power. If you have a power management on your drill, go down to a very low setting and go and drill those all the way around the top of your stove. Now all of these bits that you've cut and you've drilled are going to have these little barbs on them. Take a bit of fine sandpaper and just smooth them off. They come off pretty easily. You could use a file if you'd like. I can never find my files. But just a nice little bit of fine sandpaper. You can do it around the inside of each of these as well. When you're done with the sanding, you're ready for assembly. All of that to get 3 pieces of aluminum from 2 different cans. We're going to start by putting the inner wall together. As you remember, we made 2 little slots on either side, and we need to curl them around and slot them into place. You'll recall we made these cuts down to the center. If they're not down to the center, this will not work. Curl it around, slot it into one another, right to the edge. Then we have our cylinder. Find the ends with the notches that you've made and put that in the bottom of your stove. It will set in that little bump right there. Then we take the top and we slide that into the bottom. This is a niggly part. And you have to be careful and mindful and be patient. Sometimes little burrs on the edges of the aluminum will catch. Sometimes your expansion didn't work all that well, or a dent will get in your way. But if you're patient, you'll be able to get it together. Now once you've gotten it in, like I have, you need to line up the inner wall to slot behind that rim. And then you have your stove. You'll notice that the stove is as tall as the opening. If you're going to use another method of making an alcohol stove, make sure that your opening is proportional to the height of your stove. That's going to make it the most efficient. The opening proportional to the height of the stove. Now let's put a little alcohol in here and see it work. I'm only going to add a little, as alcohol is extremely flammable. Be mindful that you don't spill it anywhere or get it on your clothes, and never ingest it. Always ensure you're on a stable surface. Let your stove warm up. You can see as it warms, the blue flames will come out of the jets and the flame in the center will lower. A yellow flame will start to burn high if you leave it uncovered. This is obviously not a camp pot, but things to consider is that this stove is not going to hold a pot very steadily. So if you use a soda can alcohol stove, you might need to construct a separate pot stand. The other thing you might need to consider is that the bottom of your pan will gather some of the alcohol and start burning on fire. So when you remove the pot from your alcohol stove, you want to make sure that you're not lighting yourself and your gear on fire. You're going to need to let that burn off before you set that pot down. This stove is burning very efficiently. I put in maybe an ounce, maybe actually less than an ounce, a couple of tablespoons of alcohol into the stove, and I'm already starting to see steam coming off the water and bubbles form at the bottom. I say it's very efficient to get a pot of water boiling, but I've just taken the pot off to see how the stove is doing, and I'm out of fuel. It's gone out. So you want to put in enough fuel that you're going to get a full boil. As the stove comes to temperature, you're going to start seeing the holes on the side start to burn with blue flame. The blue flame is what you want. It's that inner wall that's creating that thermal layer inside that's giving you this stove top effect. This open part is actually quite inefficient, and you might get some yellow flame coming out of the top on cue. Now if you want, and you're very safe, you can use the leftover part of the top of your can as a simmering. You might need to use the pliers on your multi-tool because you don't want to burn yourself, but if you were to place this over the top of that, you can concentrate the flame and make it a bit more efficient. It took less than a minute for steam and bubbles to start to form. The efficiency and the concentrated heat of this alcohol stove never fails to impress. I've made this stove before, but I'm always impressed at how quickly and efficiently it boils water. It's feather light, it's pennies to make. It takes a little long to construct, and there are some niggly bits, but if you persevere, you'll have an ultra-light, efficient stove to bring with you on your backpacking trip. I'm going to bring this one on my next backpacking trip. If you have any questions on how to make it, watch this video again, look at the article for the instructions and the tools and the materials, or feel free to message me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions. Good luck making your own backpacking stove.